All right, let's break this down word by word, line by line, in the simplest way possible, like teaching a kid with no prior knowledge. Who was Gokhale? Gopal Krishna Gokhale was a moderate leader in the Indian freedom struggle. That means he wanted to work peacefully with the British government to get more rights for Indian people. He didn't want to fight aggressively or use violence. What did Gokhale want? Gokhale wanted unity among the people fighting for freedom. He knew that if Indians didn't work together, it would be hard to fight the British, who had a lot of power. Imagine this. If two friends are arguing while playing a game, they won't win because they are not working as a team. Gokhale knew that to win the freedom game, everyone had to be on the same team. The problem of a split, Gokhale was worried that there would be a split or division between groups fighting for freedom. One, moderates like Gokhale, they wanted to work slowly and peacefully with the British. Two, radicals like Tilak, they wanted to take strong actions and push the British out faster, even if it meant creating trouble. Gokhale saw that if these two groups stopped working together, it would be a big disaster. He wrote to a friend in October 1907 saying, "If a split happens, it will be really bad. The British government will easily control both groups." Let's imagine it like this. If two groups of students are fighting for something in school, but don't work together, the teachers, British, can easily stop them because the students are not united. That's why Gokhale didn't want the two groups, moderates and radicals, to break apart. Had example to understand. Think of two sports teams. One team, moderates, wants to play carefully, following the rules. The other team, radicals, wants to play aggressively and break some rules. The only way to win the game, freedom, is for both teams to work together. If they argue, the referee, British, can easily control the game and make both teams lose. Gokhale's struggle with Firozeshah Mehta. Now, Gokhale was very wise, but he had a problem. He had a hard time standing up to a strong-willed man named Firozeshah Mehta. Mehta was an important leader, but he had strong opinions and he didn't always want to listen to Gokhale's ideas. Because Mehta was so forceful, Gokhale couldn't push back or stand up to him. This made things harder for Gokhale to keep everyone united. Knuckling under pressure. Another problem Gokhale faced was the pressure from people in his own group, moderates. Some people in his group were also becoming a little more radical, and Gokhale had to give in or knuckle under to their ideas. This means Gokhale had to compromise or give in to some of the demands of the more aggressive people in his group, even though he knew it might not be the best way to get freedom. Example of pressure. Imagine you have some friends who want to play a game in a certain way, but you know their way isn't the best. However, they keep insisting, so you finally give in because you don't want to argue anymore. This is what happened to Gokhale. He gave in to the pressure from his own group. Final takeaway. Gokhale was a smart and wise leader who wanted unity between the moderates and radicals. He knew that if these two groups split up, the British would easily control them. Even though he wanted to stay strong, Gokhale couldn't stand up to leaders like Firozeshah Mehta. Gokhale had to give in to the pressure of some radicals in his own group, even though he didn't agree with them fully. Why was this important? The division between the moderates and radicals eventually led to a split in the Indian National Congress in 1907-7, known as the Surat Split. This weakened the movement for Indian freedom for some time. However, both groups still played important roles later on in the struggle for independence. In summary, Gokhale wanted peace and unity, but due to the strong personalities and pressures around him, he couldn't stop the split. All right, let's go through this step by step, very simply, as if you are learning this for the first time. What was the Congress session in Surat? In 1907, there was a meeting of the Indian National Congress, a group that was fighting for India's freedom from British rule, in a city called Surat, on the banks of a river named Tapti. This meeting happened on 26th of December. Two groups, radicals and moderates. At that time, The Congress was divided into two groups. One, radicals. They wanted to fight the British in a stronger way, demanding independence more forcefully. Two, moderates. They believed in talking to the British government and asking for rights in a peaceful, slower way. These two groups disagreed on how to fight for freedom. What caused the problem? Before this meeting in Surat, a previous meeting was held in Calcutta. In Calcutta, 4 resolutions, important decisions, were made. The radicals really liked these 4 decisions because they demanded stronger action against the British. Rumours, unconfirmed news, spread that the moderates wanted to cancel or not follow these decisions in the Surat meeting. The radicals heard this and became angry. They felt the moderates were trying to weaken the fight against the British. The moderates, on the other hand, were hurt and upset because for the last 3 days before the Surat meeting, the radicals were making fun of them and criticizing them in public meetings. The meeting becomes chaotic. When both groups met at Surat, there was a lot of excitement and anger. The radicals demanded a guarantee, a promise, that the 4 resolutions made in Calcutta would be accepted at Surat. They also didn't want Rash Behari Ghose, a moderate, to become the president of the Congress session that year. Both groups came ready to fight with each other. What happened at the meeting? As soon as the session began, 1,600 people, delegates who attended the meeting, started shouting and fighting. They even started throwing chairs at each other. Then someone from the crowd threw a shoe at the stage, and it hit 2 important leaders, Ferozeshah Mehta and Surendranath Banerjee. End of the meeting. The police had to come and stop the chaos. The session was over without any productive discussion. Who benefited from this fight? The only ones who won were the British rulers because the Congress was now divided, and a divided Congress meant a weaker fight against British rule. The British leader Minto even wrote to another British politician, Morley, saying this failure of Congress was a great victory for them. Simplifying further with examples, imagine you have a school project and your class is divided into 2 groups. One group wants to make a big protest sign to show they're upset about something, radicals. The other group wants to write a polite letter to the principal, moderates. Before your meeting, the first group hears a rumour that the second group wants to cancel the protest sign idea. When you all meet to discuss, people start arguing, some start shouting, and others even start throwing chairs. Finally, a teacher comes in and ends the meeting. In the end, the problem doesn't get solved, and the principal, British rulers, is happy because your class couldn't agree on what to do. Extra information. This event is called the Surat Split because it marked a split break in the unity of Congress. This weakened the Congress for some time, making it harder to fight for freedom, which was exactly what the British wanted. Here is the text as requested. Background. What is the Indian National Congress? The Indian National Congress was a group formed in 1885 by Indian leaders to work for India's freedom from British rule. The Congress aimed to unite Indians to demand more rights from the British. Over time, 2 groups developed within the Congress, radicals and moderates. Moderates wanted to talk peacefully to the British, ask for small changes, and wait for freedom gradually. Radicals wanted to take stronger action, sometimes even violent protests, and demand freedom quickly. The conflict begins. In 1907, the Congress was split between these 2 groups. The radicals and moderates were arguing a lot. Things came to a head at the Surat session of Congress on 26th of December 1907. What happened before the Surat meeting? Before the meeting at Surat, there was another important meeting in Calcutta, now called Kolkata. At this Calcutta meeting, 4 important decisions were made, which the radicals liked because they pushed for stronger action against the British. However, by the time of the Surat meeting, there were rumours that the moderates wanted to change or ignore these decisions. This made the radicals angry because they felt that the moderates were trying to weaken the movement. Tilak tries to stop the fight. But Bal Gangadhar Tilak was one of the top leaders of the radicals. He saw that there was a lot of tension between the two groups. He knew that if they fought, it would be bad for Congress and the freedom movement. So Tilak tried to prevent the fight from happening. Lala Lajpat Rai, another radical leader, later explained that Tilak had agreed to compromise. Twice at the meeting in Surat, Tilak agreed to let go of the radicals' objections, issues they were fighting over, to try to keep peace. Tilak had even agreed to allow Dr. Rash Behari Ghose, a moderate leader, to be elected as the president of Congress, even though his radical supporters didn't want this. However, Tilak's followers, other radicals, were too angry. Even though Tilak wanted peace, his followers pushed him to oppose the moderates. Tilak couldn't control them. The disaster at Surat! During the Congress session at Surat, everything went wrong. Both sides came prepared for a fight. As soon as the meeting began, the delegates, people attending the meeting, started shouting at each other. Things quickly turned violent, with people throwing chairs and even punching each other. Someone threw a shoe at the stage, hitting two important moderate leaders, Ferozeshah Mehta and Surendranath Banerjee. The police had to come in and stop the fighting. The session ended in chaos. No decisions were made, and the Congress was officially split into two groups. This was called the Surat split. Tilak's reaction after the split. After the Surat session turned into a disaster, Tilak was very surprised. He had not expected things to get so bad. He saw this split in Congress as a big loss for the freedom movement. He valued Congress because it represented the whole nation, and he thought it had great potential to bring all Indians together to fight the British. Tilak wanted to fix the damage. Here's what he did. He sent a letter to the moderates saying that he regretted, was sorry about what had happened. He accepted Rash Behari Ghose as the president of Congress. He offered to work with the moderates to reunite Congress. Refused to forgive Tilak. Even though Tilak tried to make peace, the moderates, led by people like Ferozeshah Mehta, didn't want to forgive him. They felt that they were in a strong position and didn't need to compromise with the radicals anymore. They thought they were winning. The British government takes advantage. The British government saw this split as an opportunity to weaken the radicals, who were their strongest opponents. The government took several actions to make sure the radicals couldn't rise again. Radical newspapers were shut down by the British. Tilak, the most important radical leader, was arrested and sent to Mandalay jail in Burma, now Myanmar, for 6 years. Aurobindo Ghose, another radical leader, was involved in a revolutionary conspiracy case, a plan to overthrow the British. After he was declared innocent, he left politics and went to Pondicherry to follow a spiritual path. B.C. Pal, another leader of the radicals, retired from politics for a while. Lala Lajpat Rai, who had been helpless during the Surat session, went to Britain in 1908. He came back to India in 1909, but then left for the United States for an extended stay. Radicals lose power because many of the radical leaders were injured or left the country. They couldn't organize a new political party. They couldn't even keep their movement going. For the time being, the British government had won. The Congress was divided and the radicals were no longer a strong force. The freedom struggle was weakened. Simplified example to understand. Imagine you and your friends want to win a game, but your team is divided. Some of your friends want to play very aggressively and take risks, radicals, while others want to play safely and follow the rules, moderates. Just before a big match, the aggressive players hear that the safe players want to change the strategy and play slowly. This makes the aggressive players very angry. One of the leaders of the aggressive group, Tilak, tries to calm everyone down and agrees to a compromise. But his own teammates are so angry that they don't listen to him. Instead, they start fighting with the safe players. In the end, your team fights so much that the match is cancelled. The aggressive players are punished by the coach, British government. The most important player, Tilak, is benched, sent to jail, and others either quit or leave the game. Your team is now too weak to win. The coach, British government, is happy because your team is divided and you can no longer compete. Here is the text as requested. Background. What is the Indian National Congress? The Indian National Congress was a group formed in 1885 by Indian leaders to work for India's freedom from British rule. The Congress aimed to unite Indians to demand more rights from the British. Over time, two groups developed within the Congress, radicals and moderates. Moderates wanted to talk peacefully to the British, ask for small changes, and wait for freedom gradually. Radicals wanted to take stronger action, sometimes even violent protests, and demand freedom quickly. The conflict begins. In 1907, the Congress was split between these two groups. The radicals and moderates were arguing a lot. Things came to a head at the Surat session of Congress on 26th of December 1907. What happened before the Surat meeting? Before the meeting at Surat, there was another important meeting in Calcutta, now called Kolkata. At this Calcutta meeting, 4 important decisions were made, which the radicals liked because they pushed for stronger action against the British. However, by the time of the Surat meeting, there were rumours that the moderates wanted to change or ignore these decisions. This made the radicals angry because they felt that the moderates were trying to weaken the movement. Tilak tries to stop the fight. Bal Gangadhar Tilak was one of the top leaders of the radicals. He saw that there was a lot of tension between the two groups. He knew that if they fought, it would be bad for Congress and the freedom movement. So Tilak tried to prevent the fight from happening. Lala Lajpat Rai, another radical leader, later explained that Tilak had agreed to compromise. Twice at the meeting in Surat, Tilak agreed to let go of the radicals' objections, issues they were fighting over, to try to keep peace. Tilak had even agreed to allow Dr. Rash Behari Bose, a moderate leader, to be elected as the president of Congress, even though his radical supporters didn't want this. However, Tilak's followers, other radicals, were too angry. Even though Tilak wanted peace, his followers pushed him to oppose the moderates. Tilak couldn't control them. The disaster at Surat! During the Congress session at Surat, everything went wrong. Both sides came prepared for a fight. As soon as the meeting began, the delegates, people attending the meeting, started shouting at each other. Things quickly turned violent, with people throwing chairs and even punching each other. Someone threw a shoe at the stage, hitting 2 important moderate leaders, Ferozeshah Mehta and Surendranath Banerjee. The police had to come in and stop the fighting. The session ended in chaos. No decisions were made, and the Congress was officially split into 2 groups. This was called the Surat split. Tilak's reaction after the split. After the Surat session turned into a disaster, Tilak was very surprised. He had not expected things to get so bad. He saw this split in Congress as a big loss for the freedom movement. He valued Congress because it represented the whole nation, and he thought it had great potential to bring all Indians together to fight the British. Tilak wanted to fix the damage. Here's what he did. He sent a letter to the moderates saying that he regretted, was sorry about what had happened. He accepted Rash Behari Bose as the president of Congress. He offered to work with the moderates to reunite Congress. Refused to forgive Tilak. Even though Tilak tried to make peace, the moderates, led by people like Ferozeshah Mehta, didn't want to forgive him. They felt that they were in a strong position and didn't need to compromise with the radicals anymore. They thought they were winning. The British government takes advantage. The British government saw this split as an opportunity to weaken the radicals, who were their strongest opponents. The government took several actions to make sure the radicals couldn't rise again. Radical newspapers were shut down by the British. Tilak, the most important radical leader, was arrested and sent to Mandalay jail in Burma, now Myanmar, for 6 years. Aurobindo Ghose, another radical leader, was involved in a revolutionary conspiracy case, a plan to overthrow the British. After he was declared innocent, he left politics and went to Pondicherry to follow a spiritual path. B.C. Pal, another leader of the radicals, retired from politics for a while. Lala Lajpat Rai, who had been helpless during the Surat session, went to Britain in 1908. He came back to India in 1909, but then left for the United States for an extended stay. Radicals lose power because many of the radical leaders were injured or left the country. They couldn't organize a new political party. They couldn't even keep their movement going. For the time being, the British government had won. The Congress was divided and the radicals were no longer a strong force. The freedom struggle was weakened. Simplified example to understand. Imagine you and your friends want to win a game, but your team is divided. Some of your friends want to play very aggressively and take risks, radicals, while others want to play safely and follow the rules, moderates. Just before a big match, the aggressive players hear that the safe players want to change the strategy and play slowly. This makes the aggressive players very angry. One of the leaders of the aggressive group, Tilak, tries to calm everyone down and agrees to a compromise. But his own teammates are so angry that they don't listen to him. Instead, they start fighting with the safe players. In the end, your team fights so much that the match is cancelled. The aggressive players are punished by the coach, British government. The most important player, Tilak, is benched, sent to jail, and others either quit or leave the game. Your team is now too weak to win. The coach, British government, is happy because your team is divided and you can no longer compete. Let's break this down in the simplest way possible, step by step. 1. Moderates' beliefs and their mistakes. The moderates were leaders in the Indian National Congress who believed in talking peacefully to the British and asking for small changes. They thought this slow, peaceful approach would eventually lead to India's freedom. However, after some time, they stopped doing the strong actions they had agreed on earlier during important Congress meetings in Benares and Calcutta. They ignored the radicals' ideas of taking stronger action and excluded them, kicked them out of Congress. Example to understand. Imagine a sports team where some players, moderates, want to play safe and slow, but the stronger players, radicals, want to play aggressively. The safe players tell the stronger ones, "We don't need you," and try to play alone, but they end up losing the support of the fans, Indians, because their style isn't exciting. 2. Ferozeshah Mehta's dream. Ferozeshah Mehta, one of the main moderate leaders, believed that by kicking out the radicals, they could build a new, better Congress. He used big words like resuscitated, meaning brought back to life, renovated, made new again, and reincarnated, born again, to describe this new Congress. Reality, but this new Congress failed. It lost its energy or spirit. Most Indians, especially the young people, lost respect for the moderates. The moderates became a small group, coterie of leaders with less power and support. Example, think of it like a soccer team that kicks out all its best players thinking they can still win, but in reality they lose the game and fans stop coming to watch because the team isn't exciting anymore. Number 3. Only Gokhale kept working. After this, most of the moderates gave up and stopped working for freedom. But one leader, Gopal Krishna kept going. He worked hard, along with some people from the Servants of India Society, a group he started to help Indians in peaceful ways. Servants of India Society. This group wanted to help India grow by improving education, health, and overall well-being through peaceful efforts. Example, imagine in the sports team everyone gives up after a big loss, but one player, Gokhale, keeps practicing and trying to motivate the team, even though they aren't winning right now. 4. Tilak and the radicals gain support. On the other hand, most politically aware Indians, those who cared about India's freedom, began supporting the radicals led by Lokmanya Tilak. Even though their support wasn't always strong, it was sometimes passive, most people believed the radicals' approach was better. Example, even though some fans, Indians, aren't very vocal, they silently start supporting the aggressive players, radicals who want to take bolder steps to win. 5. The national movement declined after 1908. After the Surat split, when Congress divided, the freedom movement started to slow down. Many radical leaders were arrested or had to leave politics for a while. Aurobindo Ghosh, a famous radical leader, went to jail and noticed that before he went, the country was full of energy. People were shouting, "Bande Mataram," hail to the motherland, filled with hope. What happened next? But when he came out of jail, there was a silence. People weren't as energetic anymore. Still, even though the excitement was gone, the nationalist feelings didn't disappear. People were just waiting for the next phase of the fight for freedom. Example. It's like a sports team that used to be full of energy and excitement, but after losing key players, the fans grow quiet, though deep down they still hope the team will rise again. 6. Tilak returns in 1914. In 1914, after being jailed for several years, Tilak came back. When he was released, he picked up the threads of the movement, meaning he started working again to revive the fight for freedom. Example. After being benched for a long time, the star player, Tilak, comes back and tries to get the team back together and make them strong again. To summarize, 1. The moderates tried to go slow and peaceful, but their methods failed. 2. They lost the support of young Indians and the wider public. 3. Only Gokhale and a few from the Servants of India Society kept working peacefully. 4. Most people quietly supported the radicals like Tilak because they wanted stronger actions. 5. After 1908, the national movement slowed down and the British government suppressed the radicals. 6. In 1914, Tilak returned to try to revive the movement for freedom. Let me know if this helps clarify things more for you. Let's break down the Indian Councils Act of 1909 in more detail, using very simple language so that everything is super clear. 1. Who were the moderates? The moderates were a group of leaders in India who believed in working peacefully with the British government to bring changes. They thought if they requested politely, the British would help Indians get more rights and power. Example, imagine some students in a school who believe that if they ask their teacher nicely, the teacher will allow them to decide things like their lunch breaks or homework. 2. What did the moderates want? The moderates wanted more power for Indians to make decisions about their own country. They thought if they worked with the British, India could slowly gain more control. But in 1909, the British passed a law called the Indian Councils Act. The moderates were very disappointed by this law because it didn't really give Indians the power they wanted. 3. What did the Indian Councils Act of 1909 do? The law made some small changes, but these changes were not enough. Let's break them down. A. More elected members in councils. The law increased the number of elected members in the councils. These councils were groups that helped make decisions about India. There were 2 types of councils. 1. Imperial Legislative Council. This was like the main council for the whole country. 2. Provincial councils. These were like smaller councils for different regions, like states of India. But most of the members weren't directly elected by the people. Instead, they were chosen by small groups like big landlords, rich people who owned lots of land, or British businessmen. Regular people didn't have much of a say. Example. Imagine in your school, only the richest kids and their friends are allowed to vote for the class leaders. Regular students don't get a chance to vote. This feels unfair, right? B. An Indian in the Governor-General's Council. One Indian was allowed to join the Governor-General's Executive Council, which was the small group of people who helped the Governor-General, the top British official in India, make important decisions. But this didn't mean much because the Governor-General still had most of the power. Example, it's like in a classroom, the teacher lets one student join the group of teachers who make all the decisions, but even though the student is there, the teachers still have all the power. 4. What could these councils do? Members in the councils could introduce resolutions, suggest changes. They could also ask questions to the government. They were allowed to vote on certain parts of the budget, how money was being spent by the government. But the councils had no real power. They could make suggestions, but the British didn't have to listen to them. The councils were more like advisors than people who could make decisions. Example, Imagine you are allowed to suggest things to your teacher about how the classroom should be run. But no matter what you suggest, the teacher does what they want. Your ideas are heard, but ignored. And 5, still no democracy or self-government. Even though the British added more elected members and allowed some participation, these changes didn't lead to democracy, where people have the power to vote and make decisions. India still wasn't allowed to govern itself. The British were still in full control of the country and its people. Example. Imagine in your school, the principal and teachers make all the rules. The students can suggest ideas, but they never get to decide anything important. The school is still run by the teachers, British, not the students, Indians. Hammer 6. Why were the moderates disappointed? The moderates were disappointed because they had hoped the British would give Indians more power, but the 1909 Act didn't do that. The councils were still mostly controlled by the British. The big landlords and British businessmen had more say than regular Indians. There was no real democracy or self-government for Indians. Example, the moderates were like students who believed that if they asked the teachers nicely, they would be allowed to make their own rules in the school. But after the 1909 Act, they realized the teachers only made small changes that didn't really give the students any real power. 7. Morley's statement. John Morley, who helped create the reforms, openly said in the British Parliament, their government, that these reforms were not meant to lead to a parliamentary system like the one in Britain where people vote for leaders. He said that if these changes were meant to give India more power to self-govern, he wouldn't support it. Example, Morley was like a teacher who says, I'll let the students talk about their ideas, but I'm never going to let them run the class. Summary of everything. 1. The Indian Councils Act of 1909 made small changes, but they didn't give India real power. 2. More members were elected to councils, but most were still chosen by the British or rich people, not regular Indians. 3. One Indian was allowed to join the Governor-General's Executive Council, but the British still had most of the power. 4. Members of the councils could ask questions and make suggestions, but the British didn't have to listen to them. 5. The reforms didn't create democracy or self-government for India. The British stayed in control. 6. The moderates were very disappointed because they had hoped for real changes, but the 1909 reforms didn't deliver. Does this make everything clearer now? I can add more details or examples if you want. Let me know what part you'd like to understand better. Let's break this down step by step in the simplest way possible so it's easy to understand. Hammer. 1. Morley-Minto reforms, a trick by the British. The Morley-Minto reforms were changes made by the British government in 1909. On the outside, it looked like the British were giving more power to Indians, but the real purpose of these reforms was to divide Indians and weaken their unity. The British thought, if we keep Indians fighting among themselves, they won't unite and fight against us. Example. Imagine in a classroom, students are starting to come together and ask for better rules, but the teacher doesn't want them united. So the teacher gives some students special privileges and others nothing. This causes fights among the students and they stop working together. 2. Separate electorates, dividing Hindus and Muslims. To divide the Indians, the British came up with an idea called separate electorates. This meant that Muslims could only vote for Muslim candidates, and Hindus could only vote for Hindu candidates. The goal was to make Hindus and Muslims feel like they had different interests. This would stop them from working together as one group for India's freedom. Example. Imagine the teacher in the classroom decides that boys can only vote for boy leaders, and girls can only vote for girl leaders. This could make boys and girls think they have different needs, even though they are all just students in the same school. This idea of separate electorates was like planting a poisonous tree. which would cause more problems in the future, like fights and division between communities. 3. Young revolutionaries in Bengal. Around the end of 1907, something new started happening, especially in Bengal. Some young men became impatient. They wanted to do something bold for their country, so they turned to revolutionary actions, like using bombs or violence, to show their patriotism, love for their country. Why did they do this? 1. No other way to express their patriotism. They couldn't find another way to fight for their country. 2. Anger at the British. They were angry at how the British treated Indians with arrogance and oppression, crushing anyone who stood up to them. 3. Frustration with the Congress moderates. The young men didn't like how the moderates were acting too peaceful and weak. The moderates were just asking politely for change, but the young men wanted action. Example. Imagine some students in the classroom feel very angry because the teacher keeps ignoring them, and they feel like the student leaders, moderates, are not doing enough to stand up to the teacher. So these angry students decide to do something extreme, like disrupting the class to get attention. Pan 4, the role of the radical nationalists. There was another group of leaders in India called the radicals, or radical nationalists. They made a sharp critique, meaning they strongly pointed out what was wrong with how the moderates were handling things. The radicals believed that simply asking the British for rights was not enough. What did the radicals want? They said the masses, the large number of regular Indians, should be involved in the fight for freedom. They believed in persistent opposition, meaning never giving up in their fight against the British government. They wanted action, like passive resistance, standing up against British rules in a non-violent way, example, boycotting or not following British laws. Boycotts, refusing to use British goods like foreign cloth. Boycotting British courts and schools, not going to British courts for justice or studying in their schools. The radicals talked a lot about self-sacrifice. They asked young people to be ready to sacrifice for their country's freedom. Example, it's like the radicals were telling the students, don't just ask the teacher for better rules. Stop using things that the teacher gives you, like textbooks, and be ready to make sacrifices for the cause, even if it's hard. 5. Why did young people turn to violence? While the radicals had good ideas and asked the youth for sacrifice, they didn't give them a clear path for how to fight back. They talked about action, but the young people felt like they weren't given enough guidance. This left the youth feeling frustrated. As a result, some of the impatient young men of Bengal felt that the only way they could express their patriotism was through violence, using bombs, attacking British officials, etc. Example, imagine the student leaders tell the students to take action, but they don't really explain what to do. Some students might feel lost and frustrated, and they might decide to act on their own, like disrupting classes or even doing something extreme. Summary of everything. 1. The Morley-Minto reforms in 1909 were designed to divide Indians, especially by creating separate electorates for Hindus and Muslims, making them feel like their interests were different. 2. The separate electorates were like planting a poisonous tree, which would create more problems between Hindus and Muslims in the future. 3. Some young men in Bengal became impatient and turned to revolutionary violence because they didn't see another way to show their love for India. 4. The radicals criticized the moderates and said Indians needed to oppose the British more actively by boycotting British goods and institutions. 5. The youth were inspired by the radicals' call for action, but they didn't get clear enough guidance, so some turned to extreme methods like violence. Does this explanation help? Let me know if you want more details or examples, or if there's any part you'd like to understand better. Let's explain this in more detail, step by step, with simple language. like teaching someone with no prior knowledge. 1. The radicals were more aggressive, but didn't know what to do. The radicals were a group of Indian nationalists who were much more aggressive in their fight against British rule compared to the moderates. While the moderates believed in talking to the British government and asking for reforms, the radicals wanted action. They used stronger language, were willing to face more suffering, and wanted to push the British out quickly. However, the radicals had a problem. They had no clear plan to turn their strong ideas into real action. They didn't come up with new ways for people to fight the British, and their methods were still quite similar to the moderates. They were just louder and more forceful. Example: think of 2 groups of students. One group, the moderates, wants to talk to the school principal about unfair rules. The second group, the radicals, wants to shout and protest, but they don't have any real plan for what to do after the protest. So even though they're louder, nothing changes. By 1907, the radicals were stuck. By the end of 1907, the radicals had run out of ideas. They had reached a dead end in their efforts. Instead of finding solutions, they spent most of their time criticizing the moderates and trying to take control of the Indian National Congress, the main political body at the time. Example: it's like the loud student group spends all its energy arguing with the quieter group, instead of coming up with new ways to solve the problem with the principal. As a result, they end up wasting time and the situation doesn't improve. 3. The youth were frustrated and turned to violence. Many young people in Bengal, a region in India, were frustrated because both the moderates and the radicals were not making any real progress. The youth wanted action and felt that the older leaders of both groups were not doing enough. So they decided to take matters into their own hands. One newspaper, Yugantar, expressed their anger by saying that if the British used force against Indians, then Indians should use force in return. Example: imagine if the students get so frustrated with both groups, the loud and quiet ones, that they decide to break the rules and cause trouble directly to get attention. 4. Revolutionaries wanted to use violence. These young people, known as revolutionaries, believed that force was the only way to get rid of the British. They knew that getting a huge number of people, a mass movement, to rise up would take a long time and be very difficult. But they had 2 long-term goals in mind. 1, organizing a big mass uprising with lots of people fighting together. 2, convincing the Indian army to turn against the British. They knew that both of these goals would take a long time to achieve. Example: it's like the students deciding that the best way to change the school rules is to either get all the students to protest together or convince the school guards, the army, to side with them. But they know this won't be easy or quick. Copying other countries. Assassinations. In the meantime, the revolutionaries decided to copy the methods used by other countries like Ireland and Russia. These countries had tried assassinating, killing government officials who were unpopular. The Indian revolutionaries believed that if they could kill important British officials, it would 1. Scare the British rulers, 2. Inspire Indian people to stand up against the British, 3. Remove the fear of the British from the minds of the Indian people. They thought that these assassinations would spread a message, and the trials of the revolutionaries who were caught would also inspire more people to take action. Example: it's like if the frustrated students decided to break school property or harm teachers they don't like, thinking that this would scare the principal and inspire other students to join them in the fight. 6. All they needed were brave young people. For this type of fight, assassinations and violent actions, the revolutionaries didn't need a huge group of people. They just needed enough young people who were brave enough to sacrifice their lives for the cause of India's freedom. They believed that even if some of these young people were caught and punished, it would still help spread their message. Example, it's like the students realizing that they don't need every single student to join them. They just need a small group of brave students who are willing to take big risks, knowing they might get expelled, to fight against the unfair school rules. Summary of the situation. 1. The radicals were more aggressive in their fight against British rule, but they didn't have a clear plan for how to take action. 2. By 1907, the radicals reached a point where they didn't know what to do, and instead of focusing on finding solutions, they spent their time criticizing the moderates. 3. Frustrated youth in Bengal decided to take matters into their own hands and believed that violence was the only way to achieve freedom. 4. The youth knew that organizing a big mass uprising or turning the army against the British would take a long time, so they decided to start by assassinating British officials, thinking it would scare the rulers and inspire the people. 5. All they needed was a group of brave young people willing to sacrifice their lives to make a statement and spread the message of resistance. This situation eventually led to a period of revolutionary violence in India, where some people tried to use physical force to fight the British. While it inspired some people, it didn't lead to the mass movement they hoped for at that time. Let me know if this explanation is clear or if you need more details on any part. Let's break this down in the simplest and easiest way, step by step, as if you're learning for the very first time. 1. V.D. Savarkar and Abhinav Bharat, 1904, was an Indian freedom fighter who believed that India could only become free from British rule by using violence and force. In 1904, he started a secret society called Abhinav Bharat. This was a group of people who shared his belief in fighting for freedom through revolutionary acts, violent actions to overthrow the British. Example, think of it like a group of students secretly forming a club because they want to change the unfair school rules, but instead of peaceful protests, they decide they'll have to use force or violence to make a change. 2. Newspapers and revolutionary nationalism, 1905. After 1905, several newspapers began to talk openly about revolutionary nationalism. This means they were saying that Indians should fight for their country's freedom, even if that meant using violence. Some leaders secretly supported this idea, even though they didn't say it openly. Example, imagine if some students started writing in the school newspaper that the only way to fix the school's unfair rules is by breaking them through force. Some teachers might secretly agree with them, but don't say it out loud because they're afraid of getting in trouble. 3. Failed assassination attempt in 1907. In 1907, some revolutionaries tried to kill the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, a powerful British official. This attempt failed and the person they targeted was not hurt. Example, it's like some students trying to harm the principal, but they failed and the principal was not hurt. 4. Prafulla Chakki and Khudiram Bose, 1908. In April 1908, two young revolutionaries, Prafulla Chakki and Khudiram Bose, planned to kill a British judge named Kingsford, who was very unpopular among Indians. Kingsford was known for being harsh toward Indian revolutionaries. So Chakki and Bose thought that if they killed him, it would send a strong message to the British government. Example, it's like two students planning to hurt a very strict teacher who they think is being unfair to them and their friends. 5. The bomb incident. Prafulla Chakki and Khudiram Bose made a plan to throw a bomb at Kingsford's carriage, a kind of horse-drawn vehicle. However, the bomb didn't hit Kingsford's carriage. Instead, it hit a carriage with two English ladies and they died. This was a terrible accident because they wanted to kill Kingsford, but innocent people died instead. Example, it's like the two students planning to harm the strict teacher but accidentally hurting two innocent people by mistake. Hammer 6. The aftermath. After the bomb went off, Prof. Chucky was being chased by the police. Instead of getting caught, he decided to shoot himself and died. Khudiram Bose was caught by the British police. He was put on trial, a legal process to decide if someone is guilty of a crime, and was hanged to death for the bomb attack. Example, it's like one of the students getting caught after causing the accident, going to court, and then being punished severely. Number 7. Khudiram Bose and Prafulla Chaki become heroes. Even though the bomb attack went wrong and 2 innocent people were killed, many Indian people saw Khudiram Bose and Prafulla Chaki as heroes because they were fighting for India's freedom. Thousands of people cried when Khudiram was hanged. People even made up songs about him and Prafulla, and these songs were sung all over India. This made them popular figures in the Indian freedom struggle. Example, imagine if the 2 students who planned to change the school rules through force became so famous for their bravery that other students started singing songs about them and considered them heroes, even though things didn't go as planned. Summary of events. 1. V.D. Savarkar created a secret group called Abhinav Bara in 1904 to fight the British using violence. 2. After 1905, newspapers and some leaders started talking about revolutionary nationalism, meaning India should fight for freedom, even if it meant using violence. 3. In 1907, there was a failed attempt to assassinate a British official in Bengal. 4. In 1908, Prafulla Chaki and Khudiram Bose tried to kill a British judge named Kingsford, but their bomb accidentally killed 2 innocent English women instead. 5. Prafulla shot himself to avoid being caught, and Khudiram was caught, put on trial and hanged. 6. Despite the tragic outcome, Khudiram and Prafulla became heroes to many Indians and songs were made about their bravery. This event shows how frustrated some Indian revolutionaries became and how far they were willing to go to achieve India's freedom. While their methods were violent, many people respected their courage and sacrifices for the cause of independence. Let me know if you need any more clarification or details. Alright, let's break it down even more, step by step, using simpler words and more examples to make everything crystal clear. Have 1. Revolutionary nationalism began. Around 1905, some Indians were tired of asking the British peacefully for freedom. They believed in fighting back with force. These fighters formed secret groups where they made plans to attack British officials. Some of these groups were called Anushilan Samiti and Jugantar. Example, imagine you and your friends want to fight back against a bully who keeps bothering everyone. Instead of talking to the bully, you secretly plan to scare or hurt him so he stops. 2. What did revolutionaries do? The revolutionaries did 2 big things. Assassinations. They tried to kill British officers who were very cruel to Indians. Dacoities. Robberies. They stole money to buy weapons. These robberies became known as Swadeshi dacoities. Example, it's like you and your friends deciding to hurt the people who work with the bully and stealing money from them to buy things like slingshots to defend yourselves. 3. Famous revolutionary events. Here are 2 important things revolutionaries tried to do. Rash Behari Bose and Sachin Sanyal led a group to try and kill Lord Hardinge, a powerful British leader. They threw a bomb at him while he was riding an elephant in a fancy parade, but the bomb only hurt him and didn't kill him. Another revolutionary, Madan Lal Dhingra, went to London and killed a British official named Curzon Wyllie. Example, imagine if you and your friends threw something dangerous at the bully's leader during a big event, but it only hurt him. Then one of your friends travels to another country and attacks someone who supports the bully. 4. Many revolutionaries were caught. Between 1908 and 1918, 186 revolutionaries were killed or sent to jail by the British government. Example, imagine after your group's plans, the bully's friends catch 186 of you and your friends. Some are punished severely and some are even removed from school.
5.
Revolutionaries abroad. Some revolutionaries went to other countries to keep fighting for Indian freedom. In London, revolutionaries like Shyamji Krishnavarma, V.D. Savarkar and Har Dayal set up centres to organise more actions. In Europe, people like Madame Kama and Ajit Singh also helped in planning revolutionary activities. Example: think of it like some students leaving your school and going to another country. There, they gather more support from students there to help fight back against the bully and his friends. Hashtag 6. Why did revolutionary nationalism fade away? Over time, this revolutionary movement weakened because these revolutionaries didn't have the support of the masses, the general public. They were small groups fighting secretly, and the British government was still very strong, so eventually they couldn't keep up the fight. Example: it's like if your group of students wasn't big enough and the school authorities were very powerful, so eventually your group stopped trying to fight the bully. Number 7. The legacy, what they left behind. Even though they failed to free India, the revolutionaries did something very important. They made Indians feel stronger and proud of standing up for themselves. A historian said that the revolutionaries gave Indians their manhood back, which means they helped Indians believe in themselves and feel brave. Example: even though your group didn't win against the bully, you inspired other students. They saw how you stood up for yourself, and it made them feel strong and proud to fight for what is right. Summary of everything. 1. Revolutionary nationalism was when secret groups of Indians decided to use violence to fight the British. 2. They did things like killing British officers and robbing money to buy weapons. 3. Some important revolutionaries like Rash Behari Bose, Sachin Sanyal and Madan Lal Dhingra tried to kill powerful British officials. 4 and 86 revolutionaries were caught and either killed or sent to jail between 1908 and 1918. 5. Some revolutionaries went to foreign countries to continue their fight, like London and Europe. 6. Revolutionary nationalism eventually faded because the groups were too small and didn't have enough support from the public. 7. Even though they didn't succeed, they made Indians feel proud and brave for fighting for their freedom. The revolutionaries' fight was dangerous and difficult. They tried to use force and violence to free India, but they couldn't win against the powerful British government. Still, their actions made Indians believe that they could stand up for themselves and fight for their rights. Let me know if you want to understand any part more deeply, or if there's something else you want to explore.